Breaking news this morning. I gotta say, it's breaking news that made the market sit up straight. President Trump, just a short time ago, declared on social media that the termination of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, quote, cannot come fast enough. So these are the strongest words the president has said out loud or written out loud, floating the idea of dismissing the Fed chair. A move that's legally questionable, not clear he could fire him if he wanted to. The timing also crucial. It comes just after Powell very publicly warned that the Fed would be in a tough spot as the president's tariffs raise prices and weaken the economy. He says prices likely will go up. It will likely slow down economic growth, and consumers do bear the costs of these tariffs. Let's get right to CNN's Elena Treen at the White House for this much more public front and assault on Jerome Powell. Elena.
That's right. This is really, I think, a breaking point of their relationship, or really hitting a fever pitch, I should say, with what the president is saying this morning. Just to read a little bit of what he wrote. He wrote, quote, Jerome Powell of the Fed, who is always too late and wrong, he said in all caps, yesterday issued a report which was another and typical complete mess. He went on to say that Powell's termination could not come fast enough. Now, as you mentioned, John, this comes just a day after Jerome Powell spoke in Chicago yesterday and gave his starkest warning yet of the potential economic fallout of President Donald Trump's tariff policies. He said essentially that he believed tariffs would create a, quote, challenging scenario for the central bank, and really putting some of their two main goals, which is, of course, having stable inflation and also a healthy labor market, at odds. Now, just to give you a step back and give you a little more insight into the relationship between the president and Jerome Powell, it's one that has always been tense and fraught going back years now. And the president has repeatedly, and not just in this term, but also in his first term, urged the Fed to cut rates. But we're seeing that even more so now, of course, because of the economic concerns regarding some of the president's trade policies and tariff policies. Now, one thing that is clear is that the Fed is supposed to operate independently of politics, something Powell reiterated yesterday. But we also know that the president has tried to issue an executive order to take more control over the central bank. And there's also concerns that perhaps the president could move to try and oust Jerome Powell before his term is up in May of 2026. All to say, we are seeing this fight really play out more publicly. I would anticipate this isn't the end of what we'll be hearing from the president regarding how Powell is running the Fed.
Yeah, it does not seem the president liked what Jerome Powell had to say yesterday. The president of the United States went directly after Fed Chair Jerome Powell, saying his termination cannot come fast enough. My question to you, our question to you this morning, is a simple legal one, although I'm not sure there's a simple legal answer.
Is there ever?
Can the president terminate the Fed chair?
Well, the simple legal answer, John, is we don't know for sure. If you look at the state of law as it exists at this moment here, as we sit in April 2025, the answer is no, and that's because of a U.S. Supreme Court case goes back to 1935 called Humphrey's Executor, which says in these multi-member agencies, these independent agencies like the FTC, the SEC, and here the Fed, the president can only remove those members for cause, meaning if the person has done a horrible job, has been absent, that kind of thing. And so that would protect the Fed chair. However, there has been a growing movement by this administration and by prior administrations to challenge that law and to say that essentially, no, it's up to the president if he wants to fire these people, and there's no limitations on why he can fire them. And John, really important to note, if the president does fire Chairman Powell, there will be a lawsuit. Obviously, the stakes will be very high, but that may not be the case that decides this, because there's another case involving the firing of other board members of other boards of the FTC and the National Merit Protection Board that's already up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not decided yet whether they'll take it, but that one's way ahead of this potential case in terms of the procedure here. But the stakes here are huge. I think it's only a matter of time before one of these cases reaches the Supreme Court, and that'll tell us exactly how much power the president has to fire the Fed chair and other independent appointees within the executive branch.
I mean, I feel like we have to use Boasberg's words against you when it comes to saying that it hasn't been legally tested. I'm going to say none of their responses has been satisfactory. That is not a satisfactory response, Ellie. We need it to be cut and dry. Yes or no?
I wish I could give you a yes or no, Kate. It would be irresponsible for me. What I will say is, right now, the answer is no, we can't fire him, but that could change. How about that?
Yeah, it only had one complication is there are people who think that even if the Supreme Court steps in and rules on the FTC thing.
Was this the thing you were talking about, the agent definition of an agency?
They may try to have a carve out for the Fed. I mean, it's even uncertain on top of its uncertainty here, Ellie. But it really makes it interesting when the president goes after the Fed chair so publicly. Ellie Honig, counselor, thank you very much for explaining so much. Let's get right to CNN early start anchor and business correspondent Rahel Solomon. The U.S. was already in a trade war. Now the president's kind of in a Fed war also.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the latest example of Trump sort of railing against the Federal Reserve Chair for what he calls the chair not lowering rates as he would like them to. But these comments yesterday, John, from Jay Powell, I thought were so interesting, less because of what he said, but more so how he said it. I found his comments to be very direct, very clear, very little room for ambiguity, which isn't always the way Jay Powell speaks. He said, look, these tariffs will almost certainly mean higher inflation, at least for the rest of this year, and higher unemployment for the rest of this year, and slower growth. Very clear sort of what they are expecting in terms of these tariff announcements if they are in fact to go into effect. And he also said that the announcement and the tariffs are even higher than the worst case scenario that they had been penciling in or anticipating. Take a listen.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
He also made no assurances that the Fed would come to the rescue in the midst of more turmoil in the stock market or the bond market. It was a wide-ranging conversation, John, that included Powell reiterating the Fed's independence, which is especially interesting considering the president's Truth Social post this morning. It was the only response, at least from what I could hear, the only response where he got an applause. He said, look, there is broad support in both parties for an independent Fed, and that essentially the Fed doesn't bow to political pressure no matter who is in office. I will also say that the conversation touched on some lighter topics. He said that when he's not working, he likes to FaceTime with his kids and his grandkids. And apparently, John, he likes to go to the gym. He's a big gym goer. So some moments of levity and otherwise pretty grim interview.
Look, the Fed chair never skips leg day. But you make a great point, Rahel, which is that normally he speaks in these coded terms. He didn't yesterday. That was plain English that even people like me could understand. I mean, he was talking about slower growth, higher inflation, and the fact that he was going to have to do something about it and make tough choices. And obviously the president didn't like to hear that, spurring what he said just a few minutes ago. Rahel Solomon, great report. Thanks so much.